Hello, everybody, and welcome to our video series on making sustainability actionable in sourcing and procurement. In this video series, we explore the different dimensions of the procurement operating model and what you can do to ensure sustainability is properly embedded for lasting success. Today, I have with me Thomas Udesen, the CPO of Bayer and the founder of the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, and we will talk about the role of leadership for driving sustainability throughout an organization. Hi, Thomas. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I'm super happy that I can sit here and talk to you. And I thank you for making this topic so important and front of what you're trying to do. So thanks.
Well, I'm really just happy that you agreed to participate again after already joining me for a webinar last year. So therefore, that must mean that the experience was all right for you. And so therefore, again, thanks for joining me today. So we have prepared a couple of questions that I wanted to chat through with you, because I really believe that leadership has a very important role to play in sustainability and in order to make it really part of the DNA of a procurement team. So that's going to be the theme for today. And but again, I believe that, but can you please tell us a little bit from your perspective, what is the role of leadership and what is it that you can do in order to really bring along the entire organization?
So Fabian, I also believe it is critical, and of course it is critical in procurement. But I think most procurement peers that I talk to also would articulate is also important for the C-level, the CEO, the board, the owners, the banks that helps financing organizations. If the tonality of making sustainability and sustainable business, if it doesn't come from that level, it can be pretty lonely even for the CPO to advocate this. So leadership is really mission critical to have a good shot at driving that change, which is often a cultural change, it's a philosophical change inside the organization, and with that also procurement. And as an example, you mentioned my day job, I'm with Bayer and the CPO here. The way that has been articulated into practical terms is that our CEO is also the Chief Sustainability Officer. So it is very easy when there is a trade-off that the CEO is also making a call saying, well, we have decided that we want to make all our bonuses dependent on our sustainability performance. And with that, it happens. And then, the middle managers and the rest of the organization also understands, and how do I now make sure we make the right priorities? How do we make sure that this becomes resourced, that when it then translates itself into everyday decisions, that it's embedded into the processes, that sustainability is a decision criteria for procurement, it's how you run your categories, it's how you interact with your suppliers. It then almost comes quite naturally. But if you don't get the right top and priority and focus from the CEO and leadership, then really it's very, very hard for anything to be sticking in the organization, because priorities will drift away.
And yet we see that a lot of organizations still haven't given it the same level of priority that you have. And so I think sometimes people can feel like, is it important? Is it not important? So what happens when leaders don't actually take this stance for it and really promote it, or even send mixed messages? What effect does that have on the organization?
Well, one thing is what happens in the organization. The other one is what actually happens to our children and future generations. I think anybody who chooses to ignore the urgency, in a way, is making an active choice of staying with business as usual, and with that making it more difficult for future generations. So I think one is what happens in 10 years from now. That's impacted by your decision today. Now, for the organization itself, as you say, it's a mixed message. There is, in a way, no realistic way that any individual in that organization can then systemically prioritize those topics, because you will be always dragged in towards what is seen as being most important in that organization at that given moment in time. Now, whether it is cost pressure or quality or resilience, all these topics, which are of course very, very relevant. But if nobody says that you need to now look at the sustainable impact as part of your decision-making process, which is in a way saying I am prepared to invest into the future, potentially for some short-term pain. If you don't hear that message, you will naturally gravitate towards what is the priority right now, and that's what people do. Maybe on the annual report, it's going to say, we are doing so well. We may even have organizations that have signed United Nations Global Compact principles. There's 15,000 companies who have done that. But again, if you then look at what is it that we hear now from our 7,700 ambassadors from these organizations, they say that's just not what is happening, in real life. I don't hear necessarily that message from my CPO, CEO, and they are of course completely confused.
Yeah, and I think that is actually one of the biggest challenges then when the individual's perspective and the external world don't align. But in those kind of environments, like you already said, you have lots of participants in the procurement pledge today. But what else is there for people to do if they don't feel that their organization is doing the right thing and is pushing on this topic? Is there something they can do as individuals as well?
I think you should not assume that a lack of focus equals that they're evil people and that they are
that is beyond me.
I don't think we should. I think we should assume that there is a knowledge gap, and if explained in the broader context, most humans would be able to understand that. And I think that's what also one of the principles in the pledge is, that we start with ourselves. We don't expect other people to solve our problems. We can do a lot ourselves. And I think that is by educating ourselves, creating the right vocabulary, that we actually do understand what is the business implications of not doing something or versus doing A, B, and C. So self-education, creating the vocabulary. And then I think it is building up the courage to have those conversations in your organization. Say, I don't really understand. This is what we say here, but that's what we are doing. Let's talk about it, but in a very constructive and open way, and not assuming bad intentions from anybody. Now, based on those responses, you will find out what is really going on, what are really the priorities. And I think here also there are people who will probably be better served by packing their bags and finding a place where their passion and their skill is recognized, and you can have an impact. Because there's probably nothing more frustrating to work in an organization that's not aligned with your own moral compass, and it doesn't feel like the fun and the opportunity to develop, which procurement should be. And I like this saying, I don't know who actually did it, but if you love what you're doing, you don't have to work a day in your life. And that's what we should aim. If your moral compass, your commercial interest, and your development needs are totally aligned with the organization, it doesn't really feel like work. It just feels like doing the right thing.
I think that's a very, very powerful thing to say, actually, that you can find that elsewhere. We have seen the organizations that make the right, or that do the right thing and help you develop in those spaces. So therefore, I think to really ask yourself, is this still the right place for me? Might be an uncomfortable question to ask, but it, at this point in time might be the one you need to ask yourself. But in that regard, how do you define that we as procurement are successful when it comes to sustainability? I think that is one of the questions that a lot of people ask themselves, because like signing up to the pledge, that's great, that's one thing. And I highly recommend everybody who is not yet part of the pledge to join that because you can just learn an awful lot. But what is the true success? When do we say, okay, we have really moved forward? How would you define that?
When we don't talk about it anymore.
So when it's business as usual, and it's just like one of the things that everybody is.
I think we can draw a parallel. So some of the people who were around maybe 15, 20 years ago, when the whole notion of quality was introduced, I think there is a parallel You know, back then also people started talking about quality procurement, and there was a big change effort where people were also back then saying, oh, but if you pay for quality, it would cost more. And there were all sorts of debates, how are we going to do that? It's quality, we don't need quality. Nowadays, nobody buys crap, right? It's all completely embedded into how, you will be running your organization. And so you don't talk about quality procurement, you may talk about bad quality procurement. We shouldn't talk about sustainable procurement, but we should maybe have examples of unsustainable procurement. I think that's, in a way, maybe philosophically where we need to be. I think more tangibly, I think it is linked with very clear evidence that we have contributed to the whole decarbonization agenda. That we know that the SDGs, have been achieved, that the Paris Climate Agreement of 1.5 degrees is delivered upon, is within reach. I think there are some big milestones that we need to also orientate ourselves. So we know, are we doing it in Europe? As you know, we've got the Lieferkettengesetz in Germany, but now the EU taxonomy. There is also a lot around the S dimension in our supply chains. How do we make sure that we minimize inequality? Can we talk about social procurement? What are we actually doing? I think they will be measures of success, but the definition of success will be slightly different for each organization. It's not a universal picture. We have different impacts according to where we are and what we do,
and what we want to achieve in a certain timeline. I think like having just always this perspective of like what by when is helpful to really see the progress rather than just aiming for, oh, did we hit the 1.5 degrees or not? I think that might be a little bit tough. And I think that's a great segue into the very last question that I had for you. And that is, what is the role of KPIs in supporting the right process and behaviors, and also to measure this kind of success? Do you have any guidance or experience on that?
So I think KPIs are super helpful, and I think as humans, as organizations, we know that it's important for us to know how are we doing versus what we set out to do. I think it needs to be a good balance between leading indicators, where you are looking at activities when you understand that this activity is going to lead to an outcome at a later stage. So some leading dimensions, but of course also at the end of the day, making sure that it has the desired impact. How do you measure your scope 3 emissions? How do you make sure that you are reducing scope 1 and 2? I mean, a lot of it you can measure, and you should. You can do a lot around what impact, what positive impact do you have across your supply chains, where you could talk about how do you have more gender equality? How do you make sure, for example, for us, that we are engaged with smallholders or communities who doesn't have access to the same privileges as others. So there are different ways you can do it. Just sort of saying we're going to do it and we'll come back in 10 years and talk about it, that's just not going to fly. And it's not how you drive focus, make sure that the necessary resourcing is available. It needs to be linked with KPIs. So a good balance of leading and lagging.
And I really think, like, again, something that's really practical and hands-on for people to see, okay, did I achieve that or not, is very helpful, especially in the beginning. I remember when I first had to implement a program, and it was more about how many suppliers have you brought on to this, and how many people have reached certain evaluations or have participated at all. I think that's always a very good starting point in order to just see this initial progress to then start the conversation from there, right? Perfect. Thomas, thank you so much again for taking the time and for chatting through this with me. I really, really appreciate it. And we will continue this series with going deeper onto the other dimensions of the operating model over the coming weeks. So please tune back in for the other episodes. And again, thanks, Thomas, for all of your guidance and insight on the role of leadership for embedding sustainability in procurement.
Thank you, Fabian, for inviting me, for talking about leadership, sustainable procurement, and to the audience that's listening. Hopefully it was practical, and hopefully it helps you on the next steps.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.